This video does not endorse NS ideology. The material you're about to hear is presented solely for historical and educational purposes, so we can understand how these ideas were constructed and why they mattered at the time. Imagine two rival detectives tracing the same ancient trail. The Anglo Israelites insist the 10 lost tribes found their way into Europe and Britain, while NS theorists dismiss that 10-tribe idea and looked in a completely different direction, claiming all 12 tribes were never Semitic wanderers at all but the first Nordic Aryans, born in a vanished northern Atlantis and marching across the world. Indeed, the world's history pivots on the 10 lost tribes. Alfred Rosenberg explains this sweeping vision when he writes, "Whatever the results of future research, nothing can alter the one supreme fact that the march of world history has radiated from the north over the entire planet." So what was the NS ideology? Rosenberg's northbound migrations, Wieland's mapping of the 12 Norse Æsir onto Israel's patriarchs, and Haberman's tall, fair Israelites, reborn as Saxons and Scots. Why did the NS mind cling to this ideology, and how did it rewrite biblical ancestry into a racial origin story that leaves the 10-tribe hunters in the dust? Alfred Rosenberg begins the Northern Reconstruction with a fascinating image. All in all, the old legends of Atlantis may appear in a new light. It seems far from impossible that in areas over which the Atlantic waves roll and giant icebergs float, a flourishing continent once rose above the waters, and upon it, a creative race produced a far-reaching culture, sending its children out into the world as seafarers and warriors. Rosenberg seemed to believe that lost land somewhere beneath the North Atlantic triggered every major migration of creative peoples that followed, planting Nordic footprints in Egypt, Persia, and India before the trail turned back toward Europe. Picking up this idea, Hermann Wieland insists the evidence is now beyond doubt. Atlantis and its high prehistoric Germanic culture have therefore existed. That can now be regarded as a scientifically established fact. Did they know something that has been hidden? He goes even further, combining Norse mythology into biblical history by claiming the 12 Æsir, the 12 tribes of Israel of the Bible, are but different names for one and the same stock. If Wieland is right, Odin's family tree and Jacob's 12 sons spring from a single Arctic lineage, and the Bible's drama never began in the Middle East, but under the polar skies. Frederick Haberman, an American British Israelite lecturer, not an NS member, nonetheless found an audience in Volkish circles because his tall and fair Israelites seemed to confirm the Nordic Israel narrative. He explains that this lineage still walks among us, warning that a wanderer who has no recollection of where he came from has a poor chance of reaching his destination, tracing our ancestors and pointing to Northern Europe as living proof. The Israelites, he says, were tall and fair, the cream of the Aryan race as we find them in the Irish Scots, the pure English, and the Norwegians. In his reading, the tribes never vanished. They re-emerged as the peoples of Britain and Scandinavia, evidence for Volkish writers that the Nordic North is the ancestral heart of biblical Israel and the wellspring of civilization. NS theorists embrace this view, drawing a broad Nordic Germanic circle that included Scandinavians, Anglo-Saxons, and German settlers overseas, while placing Germany at the centre, the branch they believed had preserved the blood and leadership instinct most purely. Hermann Wieland's exploration of this ideology is extremely interesting. He was a writer who sets Norse myths side by side with the Bible, looking for points that connect with each other. Wieland begins with this observation: the Edda and the Bible each revolve around a council of 12. In the Norse poems, Odin and 11 fellow gods occupy 12 high seats in Asgard. In Genesis, Jacob's 12 sons become the tribes of Israel. Wieland refuses to treat that symmetry as coincidence. He tells his readers to picture Atlantis before the flood, a northern kingdom ruled by a caste called the Æsir. When the island sank, its survivors scattered in every direction, carrying their memories with them. In the north, those memories became the legends of Odin's Hall. Farther south, Hebrew chroniclers retold the same story in new language, turning the 12 Æsir into the 12 tribes and the stronghold of Asgard into Zion. To support this idea, Wieland lays out what he calls fingerprints. First, he notes that Atlantis, Asgard, and the Israelite camp all show the same governmental outline, one supreme ruler presiding over exactly 12 territorial chiefs. Second, he claims the Æsir families bore animal totems, wolf, eagle, lamb, that match the heraldic beasts later listed by rabbinic writers for Israel's tribal standards. He argues that those 12 Æsir symbols were projected onto the sky as the zodiac, which is why, in his view, the water-bearer should be read not as an oriental figure, but as an Atlantean sea lord. By the time he finishes, Odin's council and Jacob's sons stand merged into a single Atlantean genealogy. For Wieland, this is proof that the Bible itself is a northern saga written in a foreign script, and that the bloodline of Israel is quite literally Germanic. While Wieland connects the Norse Æsir with the 12 tribes of Israel, other NS writers took a broader, less biblical approach. Alfred Rosenberg, for example, focuses on racial and cultural waves that, as he puts it, radiated from the north over the entire planet, determining in vast successive waves the spiritual face of the world. For Rosenberg, the Bible is just one of many cultural representations of this northern origin, not a central idea. Building on that northern theory, but moving from peoples to symbols, Hermann Wirth turns to a primeval mother world, connecting mother symbolism into runes. Motherworld, All-Mutter is his name for what he believes to be the oldest human religion, a polar Atlantean cult of the divine mother that once governed both the calendar and the social order. In his reading of Ice Age rock carvings, he sees a single goddess who creates through thinking, whose yearly descent and return are marked by specific signs such as the Erdzeichen and the T-rune carved beside her figure. Those signs, he says, first appear in a subarctic homeland, travellers from a Nordland Urheimat, and later spread through megalithic Europe. Wirth tracks the same mother symbol under later names, Nerthus in Tacitus, the Norns in the Edda, even the medieval Madonna, arguing that all are fragments of one primordial world mother cult that the South merely rephrased. Rudolf John Gorsleben expand on that northern legacy in The Zenith of Humanity, but translates it into rune lore. He treats each rune as a fossil of Atlantean wisdom and singles out 4 as the backbone of his system. The gate of life, symbol of original light and immortality. Gorsleben calls it the path from Ur through the Ur, hour, back to Ur, and links its angular stroke to the tilt of Earth's ecliptic. Tyr, arrow-shaped rune of generation and self-sacrifice, the son of Woden, the spark that must procreate, die and rise again. Gibor, the giver god rune, he shows whole walls in Alsace covered with its X-form and says the swastika, the Maltese cross and St. Andrew's cross are all hidden Gibor signs. The inverted man rune, to him it marks the descent of the divine being and the lunar female side of creation, the necessary counterpart to the upward striving man rune. By combining Wirth's mother symbolism into these runes, Gorsleben claims to recover the full grammar of a lost polar scripture, Ur as the mother's cosmic womb, Tyr as her renewing arrow, Gibor as the fiery wedding of heaven and earth, and Air as the moontide that draws spirit into matter. Together they form, in his words, the secret clock of the world, the same pattern that Wirth believes once circled the Divine Mother's throne in the prehistoric North. Rosenberg describes early Aryan history as one continuous Nordic wave. It begins, he writes, with the legendary march of the Atlanteans across North Africa, Persia, and India, followed by the Dorians, Macedonians, and Italic tribes, and the diffusion of the Germanic folkish migration, culminating in the colonization of the world by the Germanic West. In Persia, that wave first appears as a ruling elite and then as a religious reform. The Behistun text is a huge trilingual proclamation carved by order of King Darius I of Persia on a cliff at Behistun, modern Bisatun in western Iran. It was engraved around 520 BC, some 100 meters above ground level, and contains the same message in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian cuneiform. It is Darius proclaiming, "I, Darius, the great king of the Aryan race," while Zoroaster calls Persians back to Aryan blood in the struggle between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. Crossing the Hindu Kush, the migrants enter India as Indo-Aryans. Rosenberg says they created a gulf between themselves as conquerors and the black-brown natives, erected the Varna caste wall to keep their blood separate, and produced the earliest Vedic hymns. The Rig Veda is a collection of 1028 Sanskrit hymns arranged in 10 books mandalas. These have been dated to roughly 1500 to 1200 BC, not long after Indo-Aryan speakers entered northwest India. The hymns praise sky and ritual deities such as Indra, the storm warrior, and include famous speculative poems like the Nasadiya Sukta on the origins of the universe. They were passed on orally with great precision for centuries before later Vedas and commentaries were added. Turning west, Nordic clans push into Greece. Wave upon wave came from the Danube Valley. The ancient Mycenaean culture of the Achaeans was predominantly Nordic, and later Dorian invaders overthrow King Minos, building classical Hellas on an aristocratic ideas that forbids racial mixing. From Greece, the migration stream moves on to Italy. Rosenberg says, Rome, too, was established by a Nordic folkish wave that poured into the fertile valleys to the south of the Alps. It broke the dominion of the Etruscans, that mysterious and alien Near Eastern people. Presumably, this wave blended with the still pure indigenous tribes of the Mediterranean race, producing a hybrid character of the greatest toughness and tenacity, one that combined a lively intellect with the iron energy of masters, farmers, and heroes. In Rosenberg's reading, early Rome held its power only while that Nordic-Mediterranean mix remained strong. Later intermarriage with Eastern peoples, he argues, sapped the city's original vitality and left it vulnerable to the Oriental menace it had once resisted. Finally, the wave reaches Britain. Rosenberg calls the British blood relatives who could stand with Germany, yet he issues a warning. Should Germany and Great Britain lose the battle for racial protection, all would be lost for all time. In his geopolitical plan, Germany forms the central power, while Great Britain helps guard the West and overseas in the interests of Nordic people. The alliance is possible, but only if both nations defend their shared Nordic stock. Racial anthropologist Hans F. K. Gunther filled in the map behind that warning. He judged the Lowland English to be the most thoroughly Nordic of the British peoples, but warned that the British Isles show a gradation in the decline of Nordic blood. Wales, Dorset, Devon, and West Somerset and North West Ireland display an alpine Nordic Mediterranean mixture. The inland counties of Northampton, Huntingdon, Bedford, Buckingham, and Hertford are dark. In NS thinking then, Britain belonged to the wider Germanic family, yet showed more Celtic Mediterranean admixture, especially along the Welsh, Cornish and Irish fringes, than the German heartland. That difference, they claimed, explained why Germany should take the ideological lead. Its larger rural population and stricter racial vigilance had preserved a higher proportion of the original Nordic blood, whereas Britain, tilted toward maritime trade and empire, risked drifting further from the shared northern heritage it was still invited to defend. Rosenberg's migration map, Persia to India, then Greece, Italy, and finally Britain, is the best known Nordic wave, but it was never the only one. Hermann Wieland sends Atlantean seafarers first to Egypt, Iberia, and even pre-Columbian America before they regroup in Scandinavia and Germany. Hermann Wirth traces rune-bearing migrants down the Atlantic facade, Norway, Brittany, the British Isles, into Mediterranean megalithic zones. Rudolf Gorsleben keeps the focus on a North Sea heartland that later radiates across continental Europe. And Houston Stewart Chamberlain treats the Celtic and Germanic peoples of northwest Europe as a common starting block, while viewing Indo-Iranian culture as a parallel offshoot rather than a main highway. All agree on a polar or mid-Atlantic homeland and on southbound migrations that declined through mixing, but they draw different routes and highlight different civilizations to fit their own racial agendas. For NS theorists, pushing every great civilization and even the Bible's tribes back to a Nordic source served three strategic aims. First, racial legitimation. Alfred Rosenberg declared, "Germany is Nordic, and the Nordic element has had an effect, type-forming, also upon the Western, Dinaric and East Baltic races. If the Nordic blood were to vanish without a trace, Germany would fall to pieces and undergo a characterless chaos." Second, the anti-Jewish polemic. Hermann Wieland complained that the story of the 12 Asen is turned into a story of 12 supposed Hebrew tribes, a switch he attributes to post-exilic Jewish priests. Rosenberg sharpened the point. If the actively willed organic lie is the death of the Nordic man, then this also signifies the vital element of Jewry. The constant lie is the organic truth of the Jewish anti-race. Finally, pan-Nordic unity. Houston Stewart Chamberlain could therefore maintain that Celts, Germans and Slavs descend from one single, purely bred human stock, while Rosenberg envisaged a natural racial alliance with Britain.